I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the school building committee meeting on June 3rd. And we're talking about the high school. I want to first get a roll call, please, from John.
Vinnie Picciarelli,
Present.
Lindsay Mosca,
Present.
Dee Dee Galston,
Yes.
Heidi Perkins,
Yes.
Lori Cable,
Yes.
Steve Magoon,
Steve won't be with us tonight.
Tom Tracy,
Yes.
Paul Anastasia,
Here.
Kelly Curlbaum, no, Leo Patterson, and then John Porras. I'm here. Mark Sideris.
Yes.
Yep. Three. We're short. Three people.
Okay. Thank you.
Two people. No, three. I'm sorry.
Three. One of them we know isn't coming.
Yep.
The next item on the agenda is the designer update review. And, so, the first item is a summary from October 19 through February of 20. So I'll turn it over to Scott at this point.
Actually, Scott, sorry, could we do just a second of ground rules? Do you mind going back to the cover sheet?
Oh, yes.
If you don't mind, thank you.
And let the record also show that Kelly has joined the meeting.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, great. Hi, Kelly. Thank you.
Christy,
So-
do you want to go over those?
Please, thank you. So just briefly, it is very helpful if everybody starts and stays muted. It just makes the sound, I think, much better for everyone, except for the person speaking. There are a few ways to ask questions. So for panelists, it would be to raise your hand using under participants, there's a place to raise your hand. I'll be monitoring. For the public, you can ask questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. If you're on the Zoom meeting physically on your computer, you can also email Vinnie, which is vpicciarelli@watertown-ma.gov. And then there's also, the public can also raise your hand, and I'll be monitoring that as well. So essentially, Scott's going to be running through the presentation, and I'll try to monitor questions, and I will pass them through to the chair to address one by one, just to keep clear communication so everyone can hear each other. So with that, thank you for the time.
I want to add two more items if you can, if you don't mind, please. The first item is, please understand that this is a public meeting and everybody's watching you. Sometimes we have meetings that people are just doing some things they probably shouldn't be doing in the public. So, and the next, I want to let everyone in the public know that we are going to go through this presentation. We will open it up to the building committee first, and we won't be taking or asking for any member of the public to participate until the building committee has their opportunity to say what they need to say or ask any question that they want to ask. So I'll now turn it over to Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tonight, we wanted to update, it's been some time since we were able to have a building committee meeting focused purely on the high school, especially any kind of design update on the high school. So that's the purpose of tonight. And as we were preparing the presentation for tonight, even the design team was a bit challenged in trying to remember the decisions in the meetings. So we just quickly wanted to review the meetings that have taken place so far on the high school and some of the discussions. We won't spend a lot of time on this, but I think it's just good to know and recall what has taken place. There was a building committee meeting on the 16th where we just really kicked off with schedule and milestones, and we explained the 3 phases that we would be going through in the feasibility and schematic design, and they were PDP.
Scott?
Yes.
I'm sorry, can you pause? I think they may have just lost connection. I just got something.
Yeah,
And
just
then-
noticed that. I'm trying to fix it now.
Okay, just hold tight a second.
And the cable, that logo is in front of everybody's face again. So we didn't fix that on this one.
Scott, also, if you can, I don't know if where your microphone is, if you can get a little bit closer to it.
Sure.
Or speak up just a little bit.
It looks like we might be back. Is that true?
Not yet, because I'm still seeing a black screen on the
Okay.
TV.
Okay. This is, again, I will say it for the 10,000th time, an unfortunate thing about Zoom meetings, which I dislike a lot. It's really unfortunate that we can't, you know, that we have to do this, but we need to do an update, and I'm sure other people are frustrated as well, especially people at home.
Is there also music playing, Victoria? Is that something that happens until you get access back?
I believe so, because usually when there's nothing scheduled to be programmed, we have built-in boards of music playing.
Okay.
So I'm still trying to figure it out. It's just the computer's being pain in the butt.
All right, we're here. Just
I just got an email that said the link from the agenda is not connecting, and the TV just cut to Paul Simon music.
right.
They have good taste, at least.
Yeah, I was gonna say it could be much worse.
Yeah, it's the meeting itself, the Zoom meeting is fine. It's the streaming.
Could you possibly go back to the first page to show the Zoom information in case somebody wants to type it in manually,
That's a good idea. Thank you.
please? That would be helpful. Can we expand that a little bit? Is that possible? Good. I am getting some text from people that said that the link does work, so I guess it's sporadic at this point.
Yeah, no, I still think it's the Zoom meeting is fine. It's just the streaming. It's just
Yes.
yeah, which is good. I mean, one part is solid.
If this goes on for too long, we're going to have to continue our meeting. It is being recorded, and we'll have to join cable when we can. I really didn't, we can't be tied up the rest of the evening waiting.
So to be clear, is Comcast streaming, but RCN is not?
Vinny, I believe RCN picks up the feed from Comcast. I'm going to suggest that anybody that has a computer that may be watching this from home, and they can't watch it, but they could try to log in and join the meeting that way.
Usually at the top, it says we're streaming, but that doesn't say that now. It says it's recording, but not streaming. Do we need to do something here to say we're streaming through Zoom?
Now it's
Now
working.
it says streaming. Did somebody just turn that on, or was that?
I think the
That was
WZ
me, and I just got it back. Hopefully that's fine. I gotta answer that.
Good job. Thank you, Victoria. All right. Onward we go.
Back to Scott. Sorry.
So for those of you who were watching from home, we did take a pause, so you didn't miss anything. We were just recapping the past meetings, specifically on the high school that the building committee has sponsored. In the first kickoff meeting, we talked about what a preliminary design program was, what a preferred schematic was, and what a schematic was. Those are 3 phases that we're moving through currently. At this point in time, we've completed the preliminary design program. At the November 6th meeting, we talked in more detail about what was part of that program. We talked about a space summary that included all the various spaces in the building. They were analyzing the existing conditions of the high school. We talked about the various sites that would be studied as part of this phase. The building committee then sponsored a community forum where we talked about a lot of those same things. We talked about also 21st century school design patterns to give the community a sense of the real significant difference between a modern high school and the current high school. December 4th at the building committee meeting, we defined the options that we would be studying as option 1 scenarios would involve a new high school on the existing site. Option 2 scenarios would involve renovation and expansion of the existing high school. Option 3 scenarios would involve the combination of the Phillips site and the current existing high school site. Option 4 scenarios would involve either the DPW site, the stadium site, or the Victory Field site. And as a reminder, we take that entire parcel and specifically divide it into the DPW boundaries, the boundaries that define the stadium and the baseball field, and then the boundaries that define what we refer to as Victory Field, which is the track and the field that is inside the track, includes the tennis court, includes that portion of the entire site area. And then we talked about an analysis of Moxley Field, including that. Moving on to January 8th, it was really just about more detail on each of those options. On January 21st, we held a community forum to let the community hear about each one of those options and variations on those options. On January 29th, held a building committee that really focused on a variation of option 3 that included the potential for placing an academic high school on the Phillips site and then putting the gym and the auditorium on the existing high school site. That particular option, as a reminder, included placing a gym swing space at Victory Field because the gym had to be eliminated early on in that option. We talked about option 4A, which really just developed the DPW site and attempted to determine if a new high school could fit purely on that site. Option 4D, which was just placing a high school within the boundaries of the track and the field that sits inside of it in more detail, a more refined option. Then on February 27th, a lot of good discussion around all of those options, a lot of good feedback on the pros and cons. Then on February 27th, We talked about the MSBA process, the summary of the preliminary design program submittal. We talked about the fact that the building committee really wanted to continue discussing all options 1, 2, 3, and 4. We had taken Moxley Field off the table at that time, but we wanted continued discussion in the next phase of options 1, 2, 3, and 4. Also, a required base repair option. The MSBA requires to study a base code compliant upgrade repair. It's no new space, no new program areas, just a basic code compliance repair to the building. The committee voted to submit the preliminary design program as compiled to the MSBA. And at that point in time, a community forum was scheduled for March 18th. As everybody knows, it was not possible to hold that community forum. We did go ahead and submit the preliminary design program to the MSBA, and we did receive feedback through March. We did address all the MSBA's questions, and so we now have a complete preliminary design program, and we're in the preferred schematic phase, which means analyzing all of these various options in more detail and discussing them with the community and the building committee. What we'd like to do tonight is review what we've been up to in March, April, and May in terms of developing more detailed work in all of those option areas. Specifically, we want to review a little bit about option 2, which, as a reminder, is a renovation, expansion, reconstruction of the existing high school and the existing Phillips building. We want to talk about a couple of option 3 scenarios. We want to talk about an option 4E scenario. You may recall that when we studied the Victory Field, the stadium, and the DPW site, there was a question about considering just occupying the current stadium site with a new building and not disturbing the track and field and not disturbing the DPW site. And so 4E is going to be a review of that option, just using the stadium site. Within the options that we're going to share regarding option 3, again, that involves the Phillips and the high school site. The options that you'll see focus on evaluating the viability of being able to fit the desired program on those sites, minimizing any kind of disruption to the existing high school operation during any of the construction phasing, eliminating the need for a gymnasium swing space like we would be required in some of the earlier option 3 scenarios, increasing the available parking significantly from the existing conditions on the site, creating a home for any displacement of the Council on Aging, the district administration, and the district facilities, increasing outdoor green space, creating more outdoor student space, and then improving the arrival and departure process. We got a lot of feedback about traffic, parking, the neighborhoods, et cetera. So as we try to continue to explore option 3 scenarios, we try to address that. We'll be evaluating, and likely in the next building committee meeting, we're going to begin presenting some detailed options for renovation and expansion to the existing high school building. And all of these will be considered option 2. Option 2, any scenario under option 2 involves a renovation and expansion to the existing building. And there are a couple of reasons we're studying that. Certainly, the original 1925 building is a historic building, so we want to be able to indicate any of the challenges associated with renovating and expanding it, not only to the MSBA, but to the community and to the public and to the residents and the various committees within, commissions and committees within Watertown. So under option 2 scenarios, you're going to see in the next building committee meetings, we're going to roll out some fairly detailed solutions on those. We also are starting to more specifically define the portion of the building that we would want to save in any renovation addition option. And so we're being more specific about the various pieces of the existing high school. For example, what you see outlined in orange here is the original 1925 building. And then you'll see a couple of, well, one addition in the rear is a 1930s addition. You'll see the little additions at the front, those are 1950s. And then I think most everybody's pretty familiar with the 1980s addition that occurred here. And then the gymnasium addition in the 80s that occurred here. And then there was a 2004 addition to the cafeteria area and the student dining area. The reason this is important is because when we start to talk about this building historically and trying to save portions of the building, we need to know the definitively kind of what the original building was. So when we roll out future phases or future options for renovation and expansion to the existing high school, you'll be seeing those.
Scott, just so you're aware and others are aware, cable is out again, but we need to continue on, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so this is just a timeline, again, showing that original 1925 building, showing the addition that happened somewhat later, late 30s, showing the additions that happened in the 50s, showing the additions that happened in the 80s, and showing the small addition that happened in 2004. We're preparing all of this information because at some point in time, we have to explain to the MSBA our analysis of reuse of the existing building, and certainly we'd want to be able to explain in detail to entities like the Watertown Historic Commission, for example, what we studied, what we found, what the proposal is, what the renovation addition options look like, and why any decisions that ultimately are made are being made. This is just an example. This is the lower floor level. So this is this particular area within the existing high school building on the lowest floor. And we're just demonstrating here that, for example, when a prior renovation of that building was done, they had to add so many additional columns that essentially the only program that could occupy that area was the cable studio, because they could accept all of these columns in the middle of their spaces, but you certainly couldn't accept that in a lot of spaces. So we'll be talking about some of the constraints of the existing building as we move forward with potential options there. This is also pointing out that the original high school, which again, the 1925 building is shown here in the light purple. Everything in dark purple, as we mentioned earlier, is an addition to the original building. And then the building's been renovated and significantly altered so many times that really the only remaining original space from the 1925 building is essentially this green area, which is the auditorium and the lobby that brings you into the building, and then a few small classroom areas. And again, this is an analysis that will become part of what we're discussing eventually when we talk about our detailed development and options for expansion to the high school. This is an analysis on how the existing building prohibits some of our other strategies with regard to improving and increasing parking on the site. You may recall that a lot of our options that we've discussed and a lot of our options that we will be discussing in the future involve parking on this lowest level of the site, keeping in mind that there's a 10-foot differential between Columbia Street and this edge of the site, the back edge of the site. So we've talked about the advantage of tucking parking into the hill underneath the building. And so clearly, if we leave the existing high school in place, we're going to have to develop an alternative strategy for trying to increase the parking on the site, because that idea of bringing parking to that lowest level underneath the 1925 building would certainly be impractical. We're going to talk about this in more detail in the future. again, because we'll be taking a very comprehensive look at renovation and expansion to the high school, but we are pointing out, as we have in the past, and some of this was from preliminary design programs, some of this is new information, but why would we study renovation in addition to the 1925 building? Well, obviously, it preserves the original 1925 high school and then the 1937 Phillips building. We would need both of those buildings to achieve the program. It will keep the operations in the existing high school location, allow the high school to continue to operate a central location within the town. It would avoid any impact to Victory Field in that area. It would avoid any impact to any neighborhoods other than the area around the current high school. However, we point out, as we have in the past, that the original 1925 building, the 30s edition and the 50s edition, all contain asbestos in their plaster. That's fairly unusual. It's something I actually have never seen in my career, where all the plaster in the building, every single interior surface includes asbestos. So that results in a significant hazardous materials abatement program when we go to renovate those buildings if we were to keep them. That abatement alone has been estimated at $10 million. So certainly an impact item. Renovation and expansion to the existing high school would involve a significant movement of all the students either out of that building or break the project into very small phases over a very long duration. So we'll be talking about those phases and the impact. The project really couldn't do much to improve the efficiency of the site. Certainly if we keep the original building in place, we're just doing a large addition to that, we'll still be occupying almost the entire site and not opening up any additional green space or open space. This kind of project will likely require a multi-level parking garage somewhere on the site in order to even get close to achieving the existing parking. And although the project would improve and meet some of the educational program goals, it would be challenging to kind of provide a modern educational program in a 1925 school facility, especially with some of the structural restrictions. But we will be showing the building committee in detail kind of what some of those restrictions are. And there will be significant costs. We don't know exactly what those are, but we want to identify them again so that an appropriate and well-informed decision can be made. And then, as I mentioned, it really couldn't do much to increase the open space or the green space. I want to just pause there and respond to any questions, Mr. Chairman, any questions the building committee may have for others.
I don't see anyone coming up.
Much more information.
Sorry, Lindsay raised her hand.
Sorry, I snuck that in last minute. I mean, I appreciated all the information about the building and stuff, and you know, just in, you know, at first pass at it, it seems like there's not a lot left in terms of value of it as a historic site anymore. It's there's like a very different conversation than what we had, for instance, when we talked about the Lowell School and what was possible to renovate and add on to that building versus sort of what is even left as an original part of the building here. I mean, I appreciate how you outlined a lot of the challenges and what was actually historic left about this site, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. When the building was renovated in the 80s, much of it was just completely gutted. So when you go into the inside of the building, as we indicated in the diagrams, the only really internal spaces that remain as they did when originally constructed are the auditorium and the lobby. Certainly the exterior and that main facade along Columbia Street could be preserved, and we want to analyze what the impact of that might be. But I should point out that at one point in time, we were considering under option 2 scenarios that we might preserve just a small amount of the existing building, and it might be a portion that was not the 25 building. We now think that there's really no point in that kind of investigation, because if we are going to preserve and do a renovation addition, it needs to be about preserving that historic piece of the building. So all of our focus now is going to be on the what if scenarios and options for saving that original 1925 portion of the building, or a significant enough portion of that building that you could see that it had been preserved. But a lot of impacts, you'll see when we present some of the detailed options on it, that there's compromises and challenges, but we want to leave no stone left unturned. We have mentioned before that the Conservation Commission has a strong interest in seeing potentially what could be done there, and wanting all the information with regard to what the building committee may ultimately be deciding there. So we just want to make sure our investigation and analysis is very comprehensive. With regard to option 3, and again, as a reminder, any option under 3, whether it's A, B, C, D, etc., involves utilizing the existing Phillips site as well as the existing high school site. As we continue to develop option 3 scenarios, we've had a lot of good input from the neighborhood, the community, the building committee, and so we want to launch into what we've been up to recently on option 3 by highlighting some of the things that we were trying to achieve in a revised option 3, because the building committee has looked at option 3 scenarios in the past that utilized those sites, but in all of those there was some compromise that needed to be addressed. So we've identified what we're trying to achieve now in this revised option 3, in the revised option 3 scenario. So option 3, as we have looked at it over the past few months, involves placing a majority of the high school on the Phillips site in a single phase. There's a reason for that. If we place all of the proposed academic high school, with the exception of a couple of program elements, on the existing Phillips site, then clearly the current high school could continue in operation completely undisturbed during that process. So we're trying to achieve no disruption to the existing high school site or building while the new academic building is being constructed. The prior multi-phase options that were directly adjacent to the high school, meaning in the past we've talked about kind of trying to build a new high school around the existing building, clearly had a lot of phasing impacts to student, staff, even to the neighborhood as part of the construction. So this particular option 3 scenario is proposing to stay on the Phillips site in that first phase until a new academic high school is constructed, so that there's no disturbance to the existing high school.
Scott, if I could, just if you could try to pump up the volume a little bit, please.
Yes, I'm trying to determine exactly where my speaker is coming from.
I do think that's better.
Is that better?
Yeah, I believe it is, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Christy. The existing high school gymnasium and locker facilities could remain in place in this scenario. And as a reminder, in other option 3 scenarios that we've looked at in the past, we've proposed things like a swing space for gymnasium at the Victory Field site, a large building at the Victory Field site to handle the gymnasium that would be demolished. And so we're moving away from that as an approach in option 3. So in this scenario, we don't have to worry about that. We're staying away from this site. We're building the new academic high school on the Phillips site. The new gym in the auditorium, senior center, district administration, and district facilities building in this particular option 3 scenario would exist on the existing high school site and would come after the academic building is constructed. We also realized that we needed to target around 200 parking spaces on the site in general and get at least 150 of those underneath the building, possibly pushing the overall parking to 200 to 250 spaces as a result of the feedback we got. As a reminder, I think there are only about between 60 and 70 spaces on the current marked spaces in the current high school site. And then there's about 75 spaces on the current Phillips site. This kind of project would allow us to replace a dated council on aging facility, address the need for district administration, address the need for a facilities department, et cetera. We like the fact that it might create some synergy between the council on aging and the high school project. We've done this before where we reconstructed and built a council on aging facility in association with a new high school. And for example, they shared the walking track in that scenario. And so it can benefit both of those groups and create a really positive outcome between those two program areas. Programs like the gym, the fitness center, and the council on aging could have a lot more direct access to open area, to green space, to outdoor space. We also know that shifting a significant portion of the school activity across the street onto the Phillips site, and kind of dividing all the activity between the Phillips site and the existing high school site would do a lot to spread out that activity and alleviate some of the congestion in the neighborhood. Staying on these two sites obviously has no impact to Victory Field, the current stadium, and that site and in that neighborhood. It completely eliminates the cost of having to replicate the stadium or the track or any of those program elements by staying on these two sites. As a result of staying on these two sites, the cost of abating and demolishing the existing building is part of MSBA reimbursement. If the building is, as a reminder, if the new high school building is constructed on any site other than the existing high school site, the MSBA grant reimbursement does not participate in the demolition and abatement of the existing high school building. It keeps the overall project in the $180 million range for the high school, and then in the $20 million range for the council on aging, administration, district administration, and district facilities component. So it keeps the entire project in the $200 million range. The reason we mention that is, as you may recall, we had some projects that were starting to creep well above, some options that were starting to creep well above $200 million. And then the existing high school and the Phillips building are both more than 50 years old. And therefore the removal involves the demolition of a historic building. However, we have to think about the fact that the committee is ultimately going to be balancing a lot of priorities in the town. And the current building, the current Phillips building, as well as the current high school, really don't represent an efficient use of the site. And so we'll start to see that as the options continue to be developed and the committee continues to look at more options and variations. I would point out that this kind of project is going to significantly increase the open and green space on those two sites as well. So this is what we're referring to as option 3D. This particular option involves an academic building on the Phillips site, and again, a high school council on aging, district administration, and facilities building on the existing high school site. This is breaking down the phases that it potentially could be done in, meaning first phase would be construction of that new academic high school building. Second phase would be the construction of the gymnasium and the council on aging building. And then the district administration offices. And then the third phase would involve going ahead and constructing the gym component, or the auditorium component of this proposed building. And this particular scenario also involves a bridge connection over Common Street between those two buildings. This is a proposed site plan for this scenario, in that this is that 4-story academic building. This is gymnasium, auditorium, district administration, council on aging, district facilities. And then we're showing that with this kind of scenario, clearly you're getting more open space around the building. In this kind of scenario, you're spreading out the drop off and pick up. We feel like that Spring Street combined with Columbia Street might spread out that drop off and pick up scenario. Where we're showing the light cream colored pathways, those are all student plazas and pedestrian access. So anything you see in the light cream is proposed as a student area or plaza area. And so we're trying to create those areas both on Spring Street and on Columbia Street. We've got although you don't see it in this particular diagram, this is proposing that the athletic building and the auditorium and district administration be constructed over a parking area. So all of the program that you see here would be directly accessible from Columbia Street, would be at the same elevation as Columbia Street. And there would be a parking level tucked underneath this entire area, as well as a small surface parking area here. It opens up a field area that you see here that we're referring to as Flex Field. And then in terms of the circulation, the auto circulation on the site, the parking area that's underneath the building could be entered and exited from the corner of Broadway and Bernard right here. It's also the access to this parking area. So if you can imagine coming in, you stay on the same surface, same elevation, but you're going underneath the building and you're parking in all of this area underneath the building. And then there is a exit, likely an exit only, just for safety's sake, access onto Common Street. So the connections from that parking area that would be underneath the building are on Common Street, and then at the corner of Bernard and Broadway. And then we're showing a small amount of surface parking on the academic side, but in this scenario, if you're driving to the facility, you likely would come to the parking area down below, and then come across to go into the academic building. This diagram is showing that lowest level parking garage. And as a reminder, because the site drops 10 feet from Columbia Street to this edge of the site, and because we're proposing that all of this parking gets tucked into the side of the hill that occurs here, if you're standing here, you're basically at the same elevation as this parking. It's Columbia Street that steps up 10 feet higher, where you would go into the building that's above this parking area. So all of this field area, all of this parking area, all of this surface parking area, the first floor of this building, all at the same elevation. So it's only underground, if you will, on this edge. It would actually daylight, the parking area would daylight on these edges, on this edge and this perimeter. And that's just giving you a sense of how much green space is being preserved particularly on the existing high school site versus the current building footprint. You're clearly picking up all of the area in the rear of the building. And then this is just trying to give a sense of what the building might feel like from a three-dimensional massing standpoint. We're not attempting to design the building. As everybody knows at this point, we haven't even gotten to schematic design, but we put windows on the building, put glass on the building to just give you a sense of the 4 stories here and to give you a sense of the number of stories on this side where you've got a lower level parking area and then 2 stories or a double height gymnasium above that. And just to give you a sense of the size and scale of the building. You can see the connectivity that can occur with the openness of the field and the open kind of student area and plaza that could exist on the other side of this building along Spring and then along Columbia Street. And you can get a sense of the massing and size and scale and what a bridge in terms of massing and scale might feel like across Common Street. We would point out that the surface parking we introduced because the Council on Aging is really going to need to have that very direct access and likely will need some surface parking that would be slightly more convenient than the ground level parking underneath the building. So that's the reason we've introduced this surface parking. Obviously, if you didn't introduce that, you've got even more open green space area. And then this is just giving a sense of what those floor plans would look like. This is Common Street coming through here. This is Columbia along here, and we're showing the size of that lower level parking area. We're showing the Council on Aging program element that would be along that field we were looking at earlier, giving you a sense of some of the program components that would make up the high school. Again, this is not a detailed design of the high school, but we want to make certain that we can fit all the necessary program elements on the Phillips site. So we've at least laid them out to confirm that there's enough building area on that site to be able to do the academic portion of the building on that site. You can see the next level up being the gymnasium, which is on the same level as Columbia Street, about 10 to 12 feet higher than the remainder of the site. You can see where the auditorium is placed, again, with direct access off Columbia Street from a lobby space, district administration. And then on the 3rd level of the high school would actually be that bridge that takes you across and happens to align with the indoor walking track that wraps around the top of the gymnasium. Again, a component that the Council on Aging might be able to potentially share with the high school facility. And then when we lay out these 3rd and 4th levels of the academic building, again, we're just trying to confirm that all the necessary program components fit into those areas. Not intended to be a finished design of the building. We have a lot of work to do with the staff and administration at the high school when we get into determining what site we're building on and exactly what the overall configuration is going to be. But for now, we want to make sure we can at least make a building fit on that site. That's a lot of information already. With that, I think, Mr. Chairman, has some opening for discussion on that particular option.
Okay, we have Kelly and Paul.
So the only thing, I just had 2 questions. So Scott, I don't know if you could just explain what the program would be for the Council of Aging, just so we understand what their needs and requirements are.
Yeah. We know that the Council on Aging currently occupies about 9,000 square feet. And just based on our experience with similar projects, we're assuming that that's likely going to be more in the order of 15,000 square feet total. And so for right now, we're just kind of generically carrying that 15,000 square feet and making sure that programmatically it's divided between floor levels in a way that works in our experience. But we're assuming a program of about 15,000 square feet for them right now.
Okay, great. And then this really relates to the last scheme and this scheme. So thinking back to the elementary school projects, when we were looking at renovations versus new construction, and after a while we came back and we said new construction was actually going to be a little bit more cost effective. Could you see that being the case in this situation? And how far do we want to go down the road with looking at an existing option if doing new construction would likely be more cost effective due to abatement and other demolition requirements?
We think, based on our experience, that we will find that in the case of the high school, the delta between new construction and a renovation and expansion of the existing high school building will be even greater than it was on the elementary schools, meaning it'll be significantly more expensive to do renovation and expansion of the existing high school. We still need to make sure that is the case. We still need to confirm that we do our due diligence for two reasons. One, the MSBA wants to see it and wants to see a very comprehensive effort at demonstrating what the cost would be. And then certainly for groups like the Watertown Historic Commission, we want to be able to demonstrate that we completely explored and comprehensively explored the possibility of keeping that building, because again, they have been on the record at to the building or to the school committee specifically, just requesting that a very thorough analysis be done before any consideration of the high school being demolished is determined.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Paul.
Scott, the walking track that we're seeing, is that like a mezzanine track, kind of a YMCA model? Is that what we're looking at?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
When you say
Thank you.
YMCA model, what is it?
A lot of the YMCA's have a basketball court on one level and then like a mezzanine walking track or around the top, and you can look down into the basketball area. Is that what that is?
Sorry, yes, that's exactly what we're talking about. We've done similar programs in Norwood High School, Whitman-Hanson High School, Franklin High School, Marshfield High School, and Plymouth High Schools, and they've been hugely successful. And it is an upper mezzanine level where, quite frankly, after hours during a game, it's sometimes a great place to view and observe the game. But during the day, it's an upper level above the floor, above the bleachers, that students can do fitness activities. And then, as I mentioned, in the case of the Plymouth North School, it was built, the high school there was built at the same time as a new Council on Aging facility directly across the street from it. And the Council on Aging had access to that upper level mezzanine track.
Right. So will there be any indoor track? Like right now, I don't think it's a legitimate size MIAA track, but will that be on the lower level with the competition floor?
Yeah, on the lower level competition floor, because we're trying to keep a significant space for bleachers on both sides of the floor, it ends up that you could line, nothing official, just like the current track is nothing official, but you could line a track or a running surface that wraps around the gym floor if you wanted to.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next is John.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple different kinds of comments. One, just in general, you know, with this kind of campus look where you've got two different buildings, I think we have to keep in mind puts a real premium on making sure we have good accessibility. to both buildings. There'll be multiple ways, I assume, to get into the two sides of the campus here. And I mean, that's something I think we need to definitely keep in mind as we go forward.
Yes.
But then a different sort of question here, I kind of brought this up before. I wonder, you know, a preface to this is, you know, I think we all know this is a 60 to 70 year, whatever, investment for the community. So I think we want to, to have, this is going to be a signature building for Watertown. There's no doubt about that. And want to make sure that it has the look of that. And the one question I have, a little bit of a question, is the kind of connection between the two campuses, between the two buildings. And you show a pathway there, a bridge across there, and that may work. I'm just wondering, did you look at other ways of creating something that's a little bit more substantial, that may even have some kind of programming element to it, as opposed to just what could be a relatively narrow path between the two buildings? And in that regards, the question would be, you know, are there ways of even, I mean, you know, you think about the Common Street. I mean, we've put a lot of work into Common Street already, so I almost hesitate to bring this, but you know, conceivably, you're not going to be able to lower Common Street enough to put a building on grade there and make it into a kind of a tunnel, but it could be that it could be depressed a little bit so that you could have something where you could connect those buildings more substantially. Or conceivably, you could do it even there if you're doing it on, like, I assume you're doing it like on the second floor is where you're doing the bridge here.
Yeah, the connection in this particular option is at the third floor level,
The
just
third floor.
ensure that we've got the necessary clearances.
And do you need to go that high up in order to create the passage underneath for Common Street?
We do.
You do.
And yes, it kind of gets, well, assuming that we want typical interstate highway clearance, which I think you would want to have on something like this, just to be super safe.
Yeah.
And it also somewhat is related to the point you were making earlier. We do have some analysis done that includes placing more program in the piece that comes across Common Street.
Yep.
And we could certainly take a more thorough look at that. What happens with that, unfortunately, is you get into so many code and security requirements. Once you enclose too much of that space under your building, and it has to be explosion proof, it has to be fireproofed all around, and it makes the element that you put over Common Street much less attractive in that it can't have very many windows in it. It's got to be all solid and fire rated, and unfortunately it becomes a less attractive element to try to put program in and occupy due to all of those requirements.
Interesting. So you're saying that a kind of simply a bridge, you feel like a bridge you can make more attractive in a way.
Right, because those requirements don't come into play until you start to exceed the width of a bridge.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, there are a lot of requirements for if a vehicle was underneath that area and it caught fire or there was an explosion or anything like that, you have to build the entire component that goes across Common Street as being capable of surviving that kind of situation for a much longer duration. If the piece that goes across is any wider than just a bridge.
Okay. Well, that's interesting to know.
I think that Vinny may have some experience in this arena too, because we've had conversations about a project that he was involved with one time that was similar.
Okay. Well, and as I say, the other idea certainly would entail more costs. is if Common Street was depressed at some level. I know I think there may be groundwater issues there as well. So I don't know how much it could be depressed in that area. I mean, you know, it's coming down from the Belmont side, it's headed down, and it could probably go further down and then come back up on Mount Auburn. I don't know how much you could do of that and so that it wouldn't be, you know, cost prohibitive, and whether that would buy you anything in terms of that bridge. It may not be worth it if you can't do a more substantial building component there. I mean, maybe you could do the bridge on the second floor as opposed to the third floor, which is what it is now, you said, right, on the third floor?
Correct.
Yeah.
We would have an additional challenge if we did it, and we can explore, we'll certainly explore all of that. But the additional challenge if we try to lower Common Street is we're trying to tie the egress from this parking garage, or one of the exits from this parking garage into Common Street, just to avoid all of the exit and arrival from occurring at the corner of Broadway and Bernard. And so it would be challenging to tie that in if we drop Common Street.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. And then the other just comment I would make, I brought this up before too, you know, but it looks like with the design that you have there, the cemetery isn't a particular impact on what you have. And so perhaps it's not as much of a factor, but I raised the point before, there is kind of in the existing configuration, there's kind of one corner of the cemetery that goes, that is on Common Street, that goes close to where the kind of athletic office is. And if that's a hindrance to kind of developing a good design, I think I think it makes sense to look at the very corner of that cemetery if there needs to be some changes there. But it seems like you've worked around that in a way that it doesn't impact.
Well, we sort of have. You bring up an excellent point in that the shaded triangle that you see right here, can you see the area that's slightly more shaded?
Yep.
It makes a triangle. That's part of the cemetery.
Okay.
Now, so in this diagram, we're suggesting, and there's nothing occupying that particular triangle in the cemetery. So we're suggesting that it helps to open this up and connect these two sites if you do make a minor adjustment to the property line. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously all town property, but if you make a minor adjustment there and allow that to be part of this continuous green space, it improves by a little bit kind of the connectivity across those two areas.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay.
Right.
Oh, go
Are
ahead.
there any other questions?
Yes, Lori, you had your hand up. Are you all set?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Then Lindsay, Lindsay must have her hands up.
Sure, just a quick follow-up about the bridge, and maybe it's just an observation. I mean, it seems like Scott, it's a 4-story building in the academic side?
Correct.
I mean, other than just having the clearance over the road, it also seems to me like having that bridge access not being on the lower levels, which already have access from other points in the building, kind of would contribute to the flow as well of the building. And just off the top of my head, it seems like it would be really cost prohibitive to excavate Common Street and lower it. I mean, I'm curious if there was some thought about the flow of the buildings in the position as well, and not necessarily just the street height, because just other buildings I've been in, when they put in pedestrian access in a bridge format, it's not at the lower levels of the building.
Sure. Good points. If this is a 4-story building, which we think is the best workable height for the high school building, for a number of different reasons, the majority of which are driven by the educational program and the ability to locate 3 floors of academic, where a lot of the shared spaces are on the lower floor level, administration, dining, etc. And then you have 3 levels of academic. That would essentially mean that the center of those three levels of academic, which would be the third floor level, would be the one that would be coming across. And when you think about those students flowing from the academic level over to the high school, or over to the auditorium and gymnasium portions of the high school, it does seem appropriate that that's kind of a midpoint between the three academic floors that students can come across without having to go all the way down and then go across and go over. So interestingly enough, it never occurred to us that that was a bad height or a bad location for it, because it does seem to make sense in terms of a student flow standpoint. And just to Common Street, there is another, just in case there's somebody from Town of Watertown Facilities, we are fully aware that there's a high pressure main underneath Common Street that would be incredibly challenging to modify or relocate. I didn't mention that earlier, but there's a lot going on. As John mentioned, there's a lot going on underneath Common Street.
Christy, do you see anybody else from the committee that has questions? I just want to also comment that let's not get stuck on the bridge, because this is just an initial discussion. I think Scott does have an option here without a bridge, and we wanted to be able to have everybody take a look and go home and think about this for a little while, because I think that's important. This is a first look at this particular options. Scott, do you have another option without the bridge?
Yeah, that's the perfect lead in.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, you want me to hold all Q&A till the end?
All the public discussion will be at the end.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Anyone from the building committee would be appropriate, but as I stated at the beginning of this meeting, any questions from the audience will be opening it up to the public after the presentation and after the building committee has had a chance to weigh in.
Very good. So just one more
Thank
hand up. Kelly has her hand up.
Yes, Kelly.
This is just a quick question for clarification. Scott, on page 19, you have those orange boxes. Are those years that are noted?
They are.
Okay.
They're just to give you a sense of the timeline for construction, but yes, they are.
And I know we still have a long ways to go with this, so I don't want to get down a rabbit hole, but so this would assume potentially a 4-year construction period?
It does. Essentially a 4-year construction period.
Okay.
The good thing about it is it basically gets your entire academic building up and ready in 2 years, but the total duration of 4 years.
Okay. We're good.
Okay, Scott.
Continue.
No further ado. This is, although the floor plans are slightly different, that isn't intended to be the critique of this particular scheme. We only continue to test floor plan arrangements. A lot of components of this building could be interchangeable with the one you saw in the prior scheme. The essential difference in this 3E option versus what you saw in 3D is that we do consider that perhaps there is no bridge, and you think of it more as a campus where you've got 2 freestanding buildings on each of the 2 sites, and your access between the buildings is outdoors and is pedestrian friendly. And so these are essentially the same project, except they're 2 separate buildings. And then one significant advantage when they become 2 separate buildings is we don't have to build a program piece that gets us close to Common Street on the existing high school side of the site. Now, what do I mean by that? If we're going to have a bridge, we start to have to pull this building towards Common Street so that the bridge is not going all the way across to this building. So in the other scheme, you saw a triangular shape. It ended up being the auditorium, but you saw part of the building pulled in this direction. With a building that has no bridge, we have the freedom to go ahead and pull back and let this building kind of stand alone and have more open space come across the back of the site. And so it's just important to see that as one of the significant differences when you remove the bridge. It would be, the phases allow us to get the entire building in place a little quicker, because you may have noted in that last scheme, and as Kelly pointed out, you have that third phase in the prior scheme where you're getting the auditorium piece and getting that final bridge piece in place. Whereas in this scheme, you just have these two major buildings that you're getting in place, and you get all your program in place, while the existing gymnasium, because that's what we're working around as a reminder, the existing gymnasium can remain in place and be utilized the entire time while you're getting these two buildings in place. And so you can see what that looks like. In this particular scheme, we let the building that is along Columbia Street that includes the auditorium and the gymnasium be fairly responsive to the fact that there's a building across the street, across Common Street. What I mean by that, we literally take the lobby space that serves the gymnasium and the auditorium and align it such that you've got a direct path across. Once you're outside, you kind of got a direct pathway. And it's making a real statement of connectivity between the two buildings. I would point out that we explored other schemes that ignored that a bit more and literally just had a building with kind of a central entry and a central spine that aligned with Robbins Road. You could probably argue either one equally as strong. For the sake of tonight, we're just showing this scheme, and we're representing this option as being the no bridge option with a building along Columbia Street and an academic building on the Phillips site. You can see that when we pull back from Common Street and there is no bridge, we've got more pedestrian area, more open space, more access area with the flex field. Some of the disadvantages, I would say, associated with this would be, certainly you could argue that there has to be movement outside to get between the two buildings. We see that a lot in private schools. Certainly you see it all the time on college campuses, but on the high school campus, you'd have to think about securing access to both of those buildings if in fact people are able to move up to the building from the outside on both sides and there's no student connection bridge. Just some of the things that we'll be talking about and thinking about, or ask the building committee to think about as they explore all the different options that we're looking at. And again, although the arrangement of the program may be slightly different, this is not a critique on the building design at this point in time. We've got a lot of work in that area to do with the school department, staff administration at the high school. But it's more just proving that the program will fit and then having the building committee ultimately make a decision about this kind of option before we begin more detailed schematic design on the building, the exterior appearance, the aesthetics, the exact organization of the footprint. But you can see in this scenario, it really shows more clearly how we're trying to develop a large outdoor plaza area along Spring Street for students to be able to arrive and depart this building, and then keeping the continuous area along Columbia Street for students to be able to arrive and depart this building, parking underneath, allowing access to that parking at the corner of Bernard and Broadway, and then an exit point from that parking area onto Common Street. Again, all of that at that lower level. And a lot of very similar characteristics to the prior option 3, with the exceptions that I described. Lower level parking area, demonstrating the additional open space, particularly on the high school site. And then just giving a sense of the massing and open space in this option 3E. This is showing that when the Council on Aging falls in this particular area and you have the parking, sets you up nicely for surface parking and drop off and pick up to Council on Aging, sets the school facilities, our school district administration and facilities up in a good location with some surface parking in addition to the parking that would be happening underneath that portion of the building.
So Scott, I have 3 hands up for option 3E. So
Okay.
I do that now. Lori?
Yes, my facility and engineering mine has 0 problems with option 3E. But since I've been here, I have said that I am probably going to die crossing the street to the high school. That is a very dangerous road, and people come down there really, really quick. And high school students are not watching where they're going; they're in their phones. And so, I really do not like this option for the safety of our kids. Again, that is not from a building, facility, a financial standpoint, but just for the safety of our kids and for someone that has crossed that road many.
Thank you. Next, Superintendent Galdston.
Excellent. Thank you. I would just like to echo what Lori just said. As an inhabitant of the Phillips, I was about ready to say the exact same thing. And, you know, coupling that with the weather in New England, you know, we send our kids to Victory Field when the weather is good, but when the weather is not, the students stay within the buildings for physical education. So I would think it would be pretty challenging in the winter to not have a bridge, just to facilitate movement. And I just want to go on the record and say I really appreciate the designs and maximizing the space. And I think this is an excellent direction if this is the option that we end up maybe moving in. But I would just like to point out sometimes quads are challenging. I know this particular option is built as a quad. You know, the inner space oftentimes is not used in schools, as I think we always think it will be. Sure, it offers a lot of light and you know, gives people a sense that there's more space, but for functionality in terms of kids using it, it really isn't. I've never seen it used. Although I would say that with excellent HVAC, that might be different because people won't have their windows open. So, but I do want to say thank you to Scott and his team for these drawings. And one last thing before I mute myself again, I did want to introduce our new high school principal. Joel Jacobazzi is with us tonight. I just wanted to make sure if anybody wondered who that the person who's in the group, given the fact that he's going to be with us for quite some time, and you know this is his project as well. I just wanted to make sure that you got a sense of who he was. So,
Thank you, Superintendent.
And thank you. And Paul had his hands up.
Yeah, Scott, looking at this design, for one, I'm thinking about the superintendent's comments about weather and winter. We'd have to put coats on one side of the street, cross the street, take coats off, and store them someplace on the other side if we're going to gym class or drama or chorus. And then custodially, I'm cleaning those lobbies on both sides all day long in the winter because they're dragging salt and sand and snow and everything every time they cross that street. I know there'll be some of that with the bridge option because people will have the option to cross the street, but I think there'll be less of it. You know, trumping through the snow in the winter of New England.
Okay, if there's no more questions, let's try to get through the presentation so we have some time for public comment as well.
Thank you.
I'm not going to dwell on these 3E floor plans because again,
Right.
This is not a critique on the building design. We know it will fit. The superintendent points out that the area that we're showing in the middle of this academic building, we're really showing it to get natural light to a lot more spaces. We haven't talked about whether we would attempt to program it as a usable space on the ground level. It's opened outdoors or not, but it is very helpful in getting natural light to all the spaces. And we did that in the other scheme as well. So a significant amount of our time has also been invested in going back to the collective site area that's referred to as the DPW, the stadium, and Victory Field. And again, just as a reminder, and I only say this because I personally think it's kind of confusing. When we talk about this area, we divide it into three areas, three sub areas. The DPW, which has a property line that follows a fence that comes right down through here, and is the DPW proper as they occupy the entire space. And then the stadium that follows that fence and then comes right along the bleachers through this area, has an overlapping baseball field. That's why it's an unusual shape right here. It's a baseball diamond, and that represents the outfield for the diamond which overlaps the stadium. And then when we say Victory Field, we're literally talking about the track, the field that sits inside of it, the tennis courts, everything to the right in this diagram, to the right of the stadium, we consider the Victory Field area. And in the past, we've developed schemes that the building committee has reviewed for the DPW site. And there were a lot of reasons why schemes did not work when utilizing just the DPW site. And we've developed option 4 scenarios that occupied Victory Field, and the building committee has talked about the impact, and the community and the neighborhoods talked about the impact of that. And we've even developed schemes that occupied both the DPW and the stadium, but there were significant, very challenging impacts associated with that. So we were asked by the building committee way back at the end of preliminary design program in February to consider investigating a scheme that just occupies the stadium area. And so in March, we began doing that. And that's what this particular option 4 is. It's we refer to it as option 4E, but we want to talk through some of the advantages, disadvantages as we see them. And we don't always get these things right. The reason we put these options out there is to hear what the residents of Watertown and what the building committee thinks are advantages and disadvantages of these kinds of schemes. But we can identify the things that are somewhat obvious to us. If you build on this area, clearly you avoid phased occupied construction around the existing high school site. This is still a relatively central location within Watertown for the high school, so that's generally a positive. This option could potentially provide some connectivity between the high school and Whitney Park. Some people might consider that a disadvantage, but we just point out that there's certainly a strong proximity there. This option does require that the entire high school program be accommodated on 5.3 acres. And by comparison, when we worked with the existing high school site and the Phillips site, as we do in option 3 scenarios, we've got about 7 acres to work with. So certainly less space to work with here. We do have to be careful. The new high school and the law school would then be in very close proximity, and we would be misleading you if we told you there wouldn't be some neighborhood parking and circulation impacts, and arrival and departure impacts. Those things can sometimes be timed and staged, etc. But it would be a change in the dynamic of arrival and departure from this neighborhood in general. This site is narrow in that it has a very limited amount of frontage on a street, and frontage on a street can have many advantages, particularly with a school project. And so we consider it a narrow site because of the limited amount of frontage that we have on a primary street, in this case Orchard Street. So we have to try to get off of Orchard Street and get an emergency access lane around the entire building, which eats up a lot of the site, and then get back to Orchard Street. So you'll see that in some of our analysis in the option that a lot of the site area is taken up by that. In this scenario, we think this is a huge impact. In order to get even close to the necessary parking on this site, we have to place the gym and the auditorium at the second floor level and put parking underneath it. So you'll see that in our option. And there's certainly some disadvantages associated with that. We want to remind you, as I mentioned in the prior scenario, that the demolition of the existing high school building and the cost associated with a new field in that area, because we clearly want to replicate this stadium at the existing high school site, if this were the location for the new high school. That cost would be categorically ineligible. So any cost associated with the work at the existing high school site, its demolition, its abatement, the construction of a new stadium or fields or anything there, completely ineligible for reimbursement. The Victory Field site, meaning this portion, the track in the field, based on our observation anyway, is a heavily utilized public recreation and open space area. So we don't necessarily believe that the high school could just assume that they would have daily access to this at all hours. Sometimes in our experience, there could be some conflict there if the public's accustomed to having that. A lot of the time, so there's something to think about there. And then the new stadium at the existing high school would have a multi-use field, but we've talked before about the fact that the existing high school site couldn't replicate the same baseball scenario. It's just not large enough, it's not wide enough to accommodate that same scenario. And then the town, under this kind of option, the town would experience the loss of this stadium until the new building could be constructed and the existing building could be demolished and a new stadium could be constructed on the existing high school site. And then certainly keep in mind that locating the high school in this neighborhood would really change the parking and dynamics of this neighborhood, and putting the stadium in on the existing high school site is certainly going to be a different dynamic than currently exists there. So just some things to think about. In this scenario, we see the phases as being essentially demolish the existing stadium. And at that point, you know, it's gone for use, obviously. Construct a new building, that's probably about a 2-year project. And then move to the existing high school site, demolish the existing building, construct a stadium there. That's probably a 12 to 18-month project. And then this is providing a site plan, and you can see that essentially you've got the building, you've got the roadways for circulation, and you've got very little additional green space on the site, and you've got very little surface parking other than the parking that's underneath the gym and the auditorium, and it projects out from the gym and the auditorium on this edge. So the circulation for this site would essentially have to be that you come into the site, you circulate either into the underground parking, and by underground, I should say under building parking. It's not below ground, but it's under this building. You either go into that parking or you circulate in a loop and you come back out. This would be more of a service access and maybe an exit from that parking area that's underneath the building. But all of your activity is happening off Orchard Street. The connection that we're showing here is really just emergency access with a gate on it, much like what exists now. So you've got a lot of activity coming on and off of Orchard Street here that doesn't exist currently. And then we think it's a rather unusual circulation and parking pattern, and then the fact that we've got to pull the building up in order to a second level in this area in order to find area for parking is a little bit unusual. But we can certainly make the academic building work as a 4-story building here. And we pulled the auditorium and gym building away and then made an overhead connector or small bridge to it, just because with this footprint for the academic building, we need to try to keep natural light into the program areas that get located on all floors along this edge. So that's the reason we don't push this garage, our lower level parking, and the upper level auditorium and gym directly up against the building. This is just showing that parking underneath that would be under the gym and the auditorium, and the direct circulation in off Orchard Street. That circulation would have to go through this surface parking area and back out. And then again, this would be likely an exit only, and then also a service access, a service area for the building. It's giving you a sense of the scale of the building and how it is really occupying the entire site. And then we've shown the building committee a similar site plan layout to this one before that gives an idea of how much area a multi-use field would occupy on the existing high school site. This is a combination soccer and football field just for scale, and then replicating the current bleacher size that exists at the stadium adjacent to Victory Field, and then trying to get about 60 parking spaces into that area, and then replicating the athletic facility that exists at Victory Field now, and giving you a sense this would all be built into the side of the hill on the Columbia Street edge, and giving you a sense of how much of that site would be occupied by just the field. Again, I'm not going to focus too much on the floor plans. This is just demonstrating that on the lowest level, we've got the program elements that will fit, that would typically be located on the lowest level, including areas like dining, kitchen, administration, and guidance. And then we've got 3 more levels above that that are primarily academic. And then we've got the auditorium and the gymnasium starting on what would be the second floor level above those parking spaces. And then the 3rd and 4th floor levels. Same number of stories as the academic building we were proposing for Phillips site. So with that, Mr. Chairman, to your discretion, we'll pause for questions from the building committee.
Okay. Thank you. Questions from the building committee on this option?
Yes. Kelly has her hand up.
Scott, I feel like you've highlighted a lot of negative maybe aspects of 4E, and I don't think we would disagree with that, but I was just wondering if you could highlight maybe some positives that you see with this option, if any.
That's a loaded question.
I think that from our perspective, we developed this option to allow those who wanted to know what it would be like to place a building within the parameters of the stadium site. We were concerned from the outset that it was a fairly restrictive overall site area, and that the limited amount of street frontage it had would also be restrictive. I think the advantages as we see them would only be that it gets located on this site and doesn't involve any kind of activity at the, at the existing high school site. But it certainly moves the school activity to this location and gets it adjacent to a track and a field. But then there would be certainly some questions that the town would need to answer with regard to whether that's any advantage or not, because the stadium then gets moved to the existing high school site. So if a lot of the access for the students currently at the existing high school, for example, is to gain access to the stadium, then we really haven't even solved that problem with this scenario, because we moved the stadium. We just flipped it to, we moved the stadium away. So logistically, there might be some advantages for the school department that we're not aware of, but just from an architectural standpoint, there is less open space. It's a relatively confined site. We don't particularly love the circulation pattern required. We, in our experience, taking those facilities like the gym and the auditorium that are primarily public facilities and having them be second floor entry level has a certain number of challenges with it. The only advantage is if you're someone who does not want it at the existing high school site, then this is one of the scenarios that that might satisfy that requirement.
And then, sorry, just one more question. I just was curious for the current use of the track from the high school. Are they using that for their PE classes, or it would just be interested? I'd be interested to know just like what the typical use is.
They have their track and field meets there as well as
Yeah.
other
What
activities.
about during the day? Does anyone know?
Dee Dee has raised her hand.
Thank you.
Superintendent?
So again, during the day, throughout the day, the students leave the current high school and walk to the field when the weather permits, and they do their PE classes at Victory Field. So I mean, as long as they can get out, they get out, and they take that walk and use the field. And as was just said, I mean, all of our extracurricular sports such as soccer and field hockey and football all use this space as well. And while I understand the separation, having the soccer field now potentially being moved to the old site, I think that if it hasn't been said, I think that the probably the one advantage on the opposite of all the disadvantages is just that you have that campus where you do have a field right there, and you wouldn't have to have people walking, which they'll still have to do if we stay in the Phillips and the existing site, which I'm not saying it's a good or a bad option. I'm just saying that you're still going to have that walking to the larger field to do the outdoor PE. So,
And I think that was my question, just with the other scheme showing the existing buildings, there is a field, and I was wondering if the intent of that field was to put, the PE classes on that so they're not having to walk to the track.
I think from our perspective, we certainly would want to take a look at what kind of space the current PE classes are occupying, because we have created a large field space at the existing high school with those option 3 scenarios. So, I mean, it's the perfect question, Kelly. I think we need to ask, how much of that movement does it alleviate between that location and this location by creating, under the option 3 scenarios, a large field area?
With this option as well, the town still has to find a baseball field that's regulation size for varsity baseball from the high school.
Good point.
Dee Dee.
yeah, sorry. So maybe at the next presentation, or as a follow-up, if you could just kind of transpose what that field would look like on options 3E and 3D, just to get a sense of its size and what it practically could be used for. I also noticed, I think you had one tennis court or an outdoor basketball court on the side of the building too, in the old, where we are right now. Is that correct?
we did in a couple of scenarios, but that's excellent feedback, Dr. Dawson. We'll take a look at overlaying what is possible in that area that's created on the existing high school site.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Christy, do you see any?
I do not.
Okay. I want to open it up now to participants. Are there any questions from the members of the audience before we go on to timeline? Because I think
Yes, we do. I will read it off. I am sorry, but I don't remember all the option numbers. I think it is option 2 with the bridge. If you put the gym at the end, it would be hard for students to get back and forth to gym class. We had that problem in my high school where they added the gym at the far bottom end of a new addition, and it was a big hassle. I encourage any choice that puts the gym closer to the bridge. Regarding 4E, that site does not have practical MBTA bus access.
there's another question there, and then someone has their hand raised.
Okay. Do we want to answer? Or just-
Answer Anne Marie Clunen's question.
Okay, so the next question, is there a cost comparison for each?
This would go to Scott.
Yeah, sure. We have not done the cost analysis for each yet. After we develop all these options and take the building committee's feedback at some point in time, we'll certainly be doing with the option 3 analysis, with the option 3 scenarios. We have done some cost analysis on those just to confirm, as I mentioned previously, that they fall in that $200 million realm. We have not done cost analysis on 4E or any of the other options. At the end of this, at the end of preferred schematic, just as a reminder, we're supposed to do detailed analysis for cost on all of the options so that that information is available, and we're beginning that now as we develop the options.
She had one more question, then we'll go see the hand raised on Jimmy Mello.
Yes. How does Victory Field option upgrade the admin building and senior center?
It does not. It does not address those at all.
Okay, Jimmy Mello, can you unmute, please? Jimmy, go ahead. Jimmy, can you hear us?
Hold on, I may have to do it. Let me check and see if I have to.
Probably.
Jim Mello. Okay.
Jimmy? Go ahead, Jimmy.
Yep, you've been unmuted.
Okay, why don't you type out your question, Jimmy? I think Jolly had her hand up as well, Jocelyn. Where'd she go?
Okay, I just unmuted.
Jolly Tagger. Okay.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. 2 questions. One is the bridge over Common. Do we pay for that, or is that split with the MSBA? Because there's been some discussion about what the MSBA won't cover. Will they pay for that bridge or help pay for it? That's one question. And then the second question is, I asked it I wrote it in before I heard John's question, but is it possible, rather than having a bridge, to have a pedestrian tunnel under Common between the 2 buildings?
So with regard to the first question, the bridge will become part of the hallway and corridor circulation for the building. So presumably it would be reimbursed as part of the building. Now the MSBA, as we've talked about before, are going to put a variety of different construction cost caps, building size caps, program caps, etc. But it's not an element that would just be categorically ineligible. It is part of the circulation for the building. So in our experience, there's no reason for it to be ineligible for reimbursement grant funding. The tunnel's a possibility. In general, tunnels are slightly more complicated in that it requires somebody to go down to that tunnel level. We've done tunnels before. Cardinal Spellman has a tunnel at their facility, but it requires an elevator for somebody to be able to go down. From an accessibility standpoint, it's slightly more challenging because it always requires somebody to go down to that level, go across, and then get back in an elevator. That's going to be an issue with somebody who's not on the third floor anyway, but they're less exciting, they're kind of less dramatic. But yes, we could definitely explore a tunnel if the building committee wanted to look at the impact of that.
Christy, let's get the couple of questions that came up.
Okay, I just unmuted Elodia too. So I'll read off the Q&A and we'll
Read the Q&A and then we can get Elodia.
You got it. Thank you. Okay. Did you consider putting the frontage toward Victory Oval instead of Orchard? Is the frontage at Phillips School site toward Common? Have you reached out to abutters on Marshall and Spring Streets yet?
Wow, when the question count gets to 3, I'm going to have some help remembering.
Yeah, I'll answer the last part, the last question first. The last question is we haven't reached out to anybody because this is the first time this building committee is looking at these options. And until we come up with where the building committee may be going, we're not going to reach out to people and get expectations or heightened anxiety for no reason. We're trying to at least work through the process first, get some options going, let the committee think about it. We're going to have another community forum or 2 or 3, and then we, at some point, yes, we are going to reach out, but this is not the appropriate time because this is the first time everybody's seeing what could go in each of these locations. I'll let Scott try to handle the other 2.
So I think one of Elodia's questions was frontage.
One was consider putting the frontage towards Victory Oval.
Right.
So in this scenario, I probably did a poor job explaining that, but in this scenario, the primary facade of the building and entry is towards the Victory Oval, if that's what she's referring to, meaning this is the primary entry facade for the building. Its only frontage is on Orchard Street in terms of street frontage, and that is a dining area and then a small outdoor dining plaza. But that primary facade of the building is fronting onto the Oval and Victory Field. And then I think there was a question about—
Yeah, is the frontage at Phillips.
Yes.
Towards Common.
We did. In fact, we have— a version of option 3 that we're not showing tonight, just for sake of brevity, that had this building completely fronting onto Common Street and all of the egress and access off of Common Street. We're not showing it because we're a little concerned that we would hear comments about the amount of activity on Common Street, but we could certainly roll that out at some point to the building committee. We do have a building that fronts more on Common Street than it does on Spring Street.
Okay, next question. This question is for Scott. Given that this is a flagship project and community hub for the town and a once-in-a-generation opportunity, will you be guided by principles of universal design at the outset to accommodate the widest range of users, students, faculty, staff, wider community, and COA, older adults, parentheses, through good accessible design?
Universal design is the key word there. So I want to just talk about what that means. We're going to meet all accessibility requirements with regard to Massachusetts Access, with regard to the American Disability Act, et cetera. But universal design goes above and beyond that and essentially says, meet all those requirements, but also make certain that the opportunity is there, regardless of the space, regardless of the location, regardless of movement up to the site, make sure that nobody's access or opportunity is restricted. And so it's a term we use all the time now in architectural design. And certainly we want to make certain that we have all of the best principles and most comprehensive principles of universal design included, which means no matter where you are on the site, no matter where you're moving around this campus, inside, outside the building, et cetera, that it's equal opportunity for everybody, no matter what kind of accessibility challenges they may face.
Let's let Elodie at this point, please.
Hi, thank you, Mark. I just want to say, as somebody else mentioned, this is going to be the flagship building in our community. I obviously like the site on Common Street the best. It's accessible by public transportation, but it breathes and it can be seen as you go down Mount Auburn Street. Whereas squishing it into that little site over off of Orchard, and I know it's not your rendering, Scott, I know whatever you do, it would be full of imagination, but it feels like we're making a small prison over there. I already feel claustrophobic with the layout, and that's no fault of yours, believe me, but it's just so squeezed. We still don't address a baseball field. We're not going to get reimbursed for all those things. I mean, we need to be practical, and then we have to think about our entire community in regard to the Council on Aging. The site of Phillips and Common gives us so much bang for the buck of what we're going to be spending. And as you said, it's going to last 60, 75, maybe 100 years, God knows, with the crazy economy that we're living through these days. But I think it should be just a beautiful, brilliant, attractive spot. And I love all the green space you added around it. I thought you said there is a water main under Common Street, so doing a tunnel would be kind of crazy. And I personally love the simple glass bridge. I think it's like having a beautiful eyebrow between the two buildings, and it's full of light. It's the light. The only thing I want to go back to is what Dee Dee said with the academic building, with the center of, when you have the center of the building, what did you call that? The hole in there? Those things, they need to be really tended to very carefully. I'm forgetting the name of it, Scott. But yeah, in the center, yes. I mean, I know it gives light to the whole building in a sense, but it also seems like a hole in the building, and snow piles up and litter piles up. And so unless somebody's really maintaining that and making it attractive through plantings and everything, I just am more practical about those things. But I love the green space you've added, and it's really, I'm just so excited. And this should be exciting. And I don't know, the squished building on Orchard Street just doesn't do it for me. But thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to just add a few comments.
Thank you. Let's get to the next question, Christy.
Okay, Jimmy Mello. I would like to compliment Scott and his team on 3D and 3E. I personally think this is the way to go. When you look at the use of open space for outdoor gym, please do them for both options. Okay. Next, if this is a 50+ year building, which option has the greatest capacity for enrollment growth in the distant future?
Well, I think at the end of the day, we're going to have to demonstrate, one of the requirements is we're going to have to demonstrate to the MSBA that any option that we propose has the ability for enrollment growth. I think that clearly option 3 scenarios, because you have 7 acres available, are going to have more area to utilize. But ultimately, we're going to have to demonstrate that any of the options, and that may include with the 4E option, with the stadium option, designing it so that it can accommodate 5th floor, even though programmatically we may not be fans of that. We'll have to demonstrate that it's a possibility. But the additional acreage at the Phillips and the existing high school site would make that one look more viable in terms of future expansion.
Okay, next, David Stokes, just a minor clarifying question. Would the first floor of option 4E be at the Orchard Street level? The current stadium field is not. If so, the outdoor dining against the street might not be overly popular.
It's a really good point. On this site, in order to achieve what we're showing, we have to make a fairly significant grade change to make sure that this is not down in a hole, if you will, because the stadium is down slightly. There's a slope down from Orchard Street immediately off the sidewalk. And so as we develop this, the assumption is we'll bring this up a little bit, but it still won't be at the exact same elevation as Orchard Street. It'll be slightly below Orchard Street.
Thank you. Next question, Lisa Feltner. It would be good to do about realistic student traffic acts across Common Street throughout the academic year next meeting. Not everyone will use the bridge all the time. It would be good to do probably a little bit more or show more about realistic student traffic access across Common Street throughout the academic year at the next meeting. I think I'm interpreting that correctly.
Yes, that sounds appropriate.
I would point out that in the option 3 scenarios, one of the reasons that we're proposing an exterior plaza along Spring Street and an exterior plaza along Columbia Street and making sure there's plenty of student circulation space there is because if students do decide to move between the 2 buildings, we want to make sure they're either utilizing the crosswalk that exists at this intersection, or we would have to create a major raised crosswalk area in this zone if we expected students to move across there. But we can certainly continue to investigate that because we understand the sensitivity of that.
Christy, I don't see any more questions.
No, me neither.
Okay. Thank you all for the questions. I want to move on now to the next slide if we could. And I think this one's for Tim.
So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this particular slide because this actually was, Scott touched on this, that this sort of explains the 3 phases, and we are in the middle of the preferred schematic report. So Scott, we can go to the next slide. So when we look at the timeline and what we're trying to accomplish over this phase, so the preferred schematic report, you know, this is leading toward the fall of 2021 approval timeframe. So when we look at the timeline, we sort of look at the end date as we typically do with timelines. And so this PSR submission, we're currently targeting for January of 2021. I will tell you that the board schedule is not out yet, so we don't know if that's the date or it'll be January or February, but it's in that, you know, sort of in that general area. When we've sort of broken the period up into two major sort of focus points. So the first part, which we're really looking at this summer and starting tonight and dealing with community forums and getting participation and feedback, is kind of the development of these options that you saw tonight. So we expect to take through July and August, more time to detail those out, to get your questions like you've had tonight answered, and essentially kind of continue the development, if you will, kind of opening up the broadening the development of what we're dealing with these options. In September, in order to make that PSR submission in January, we do need to, hopefully, if you feel like you've gotten enough information, you can give direction to the team so that we can refine one or two of these options. As Scott mentioned, we have to move forward with an ad reno option anyways to some extent. So we're probably more looking at whether we can refine one of these new construction options, and take that, sort of moving it forward through the fall, deal with a lot more detail around final layout and size. As Scott mentioned, the layout is really just a placeholder at this point. I mean, it's good in bulk, but it's certainly not in detail. Sustainability issues, traffic, parking, site, the historic commission issue, we would be more developing in the fall. Phasing, impact, schedule, obviously on this project, these are considerable and complex. Looking at MEP systems and structural systems. So that the intention is to sort of take it through the fall, with September, if you can kind of keep in your mind, as kind of a critical meeting to narrow this down to where we take one of them. The MSBA does require in the preferred schematic report that we spend more time than you might think the term preferred schematic means. So, and this is a more complex project than many projects, given its location in any of the locations we're looking at. So that's kind of a general update on the timeline. And I just really want to kind of keep people realize we're going to stay active this summer. It's, you know, hopefully with the situation we're in, we can get attendance at community forums, and we're going to talk about that. These are just placeholder forums. If we need more than this, we can have more. We're just sort of indicating kind of ideas around community forums, but that'll be something that'll be fluid as we move through it. So I can take questions on the timeline if folks have them.
Any questions on the timeline?
Kelly, I saw your hand. Did you take it down?
No,
Sorry.
and sorry, Tim, if you already said this, but I guess my question is, do we have to wait until September to narrow these selections down? I mean, there's some obvious opinions, and I feel like there is a little bit of a consensus on some of the options. And I wonder if, in order to either stay on schedule or expedite schedule, or to give ourselves some more times to further develop two options, if we could go ahead and eliminate one prior to September.
There's nothing magic about September. We were just doing it because we would need it by then to make January. If you folks decided that there was consensus prior to that, I think that's a committee decision that needs to be discussed at some point.
I think for the sake of Scott's time as well, it may make sense for us to make a decision earlier to that, because I think it would give us more time to further develop other options.
I'm going to chime in here as well. We're intending on doing at least one or two more community forums. We wanted to get these options out there tonight so that people had an opportunity, in particular, the building committee had an opportunity to see them. We can narrow this down if you want to narrow it. If we think we can narrow it down in a month, we will. But I want to make sure that the general public, other than the people, the 26 or 36 people that are 26 people, 29 people that came in tonight, has an opportunity to be able to weigh in. It's not a hard and fast timeline in my own mind. Or, you know, if the building committee wants to move quicker, we will. But I do think that we need to have a little more public participation through forums before we can say, Scott, this is where we're going. Anyone else on the timeline on this? Do you have another slide there, Tim?
No, now it's the community meeting.
Okay, we have three quick questions, and these will be the last questions, Christy.
Okay. Libby Shaw, late question regarding the high school. Can traffic slowing berms be built on Common Street to minimize traffic hazards to pedestrians crossing between the two buildings?
I would just say they absolutely could. In fact, when we talk about a raised plaza there or a raised crossing, that's exactly what we're talking about. An enormous traffic slowing berm, and probably in multiple locations. But if we decide that there is going to be significant movement across Common, we would absolutely do that.
Okay, thank you. Next, David Stokes, with option 4E, are there any specific infrastructure improvements that would be required to house WCA TV studios and classrooms?
No, I think those would be included no matter what the options are. No matter what the options are, we would be taking a look at that. So I don't think that's a defining factor regardless of option. It's always included.
Okay. Next, Lisa Feltner. This is sort of administrative, I think, to us. If you could make presentations available to download for the next meeting, it would be appreciated. It's difficult to keep track and absorb materials and hold questions while limited to sharing Scott's real-time screen. We actually have talked about that in the past when we've been talking about even the website. So let me revisit that with Watertown Cable and the communications committee, subcommittee, I would say, and see if we can work through the process to make that happen.
We will work through the process to do that, because that's how we can share the options that we're looking at in another fashion. So I will work with Christy and the communication subcommittee to see what we can do to get all that stuff on the website for it.
Thank you. Next, yes on public participation, please, is necessary, as we should be getting public buy-in on location early. That was Lisa Feltner. Next, Jay Roars. Thank you, Mark. We only heard about this meeting at 9 a.m. this morning. It was very, very short notice. I trust there will be more meetings for the general public and with better notice. And the next, my name is Jill Roars, and I live on Marion Road. Continuing down, Jocelyn Tager. Slowing down this process is important, because doing an override in this COVID period when so many people are struggling will be difficult. Next, Elodia, please share the info ahead of time for community review. We will do that.
Okay, thank you. That's the end of the public forum portion. Tim, do you have anything you want to go now to this section? Do you want me to take this?
That would be great, Mark.
Okay, thank you. We're looking at, first of all, community forum. We're looking at having one more community forum sometime in June. We just have not finalized the date. And when we do, we'll try to get it out there as soon as possible. We're going to try to also, if needed, have them in July and August. I think, again, we heard from someone that just commented about how they just heard about this, and having meetings in this fashion is, again, difficult, but we're going to do our best. The school building committee, again, we're getting a little bit busy now, so it appears we're going back to our 2 monthly meetings. One meeting will be the elementary school, one meeting will be the high school, and we may have to have an additional official building committee meeting at some point during the summer if we choose to narrow down these options or give pointed direction to the team on where we're going to go. So I'm kind of, if there are any questions on those meetings, I'm happy to take them at this point. Okay, does anyone else have anything before we wrap it up?
Lindsay has her hand up.
Yes, Lindsay.
I I was just going to say that I don't know how other people feel, but I'm not against meeting in the summer. Most of my plans for life have been canceled. So I'm not against continuing this work in the summer at all. I think it's definitely a less than typical summer for a lot of people. The other point that I just wanted to make in terms of how our meetings are going and trying to organize community forums, I think that there's a lot of reasons, no matter what setting we have for community forums or meetings, why people can or cannot attend. In this format that we have right now, just for a school building committee meeting, even though it's not a public forum, we have more people participating here and asking questions than we have before. And I think that while there are some people who struggle to access it, there are different people who do have access. And so I think that there's, benefits both ways. And there certainly seems to be the trend as this continues that more people participate and have access to it. And I would really encourage us to include on our agendas in email for people to pre-ask questions that maybe isn't to a particular person, but to the school building committee in general, so we can gather those, and that is on the agenda documents linked up just like the other things are, so that people can click into that in pre-submit questions or concerns that they have as well, just for as many access points in this virtual format as we can.
I will also add, in this format, you can even join the meeting when you're on vacation if you have that type of a plan. So to
Yes.
Lindsay's point, some plans may be derailed, but this is actually another way that people could say, yeah, I'm on vacation, but I can still take a couple of hours out of my, and we don't want to do that if we don't have to, but again, we do have options available, and we're going to use as many options as possible.
Silver linings.
Okay, John has his hand up.
John?
Yeah, Mark, so are you thinking then that for building committee meetings, we should be kind of tentatively thinking about the first and third Wednesday for the summer?
Yeah, I'm going to try to do that.
Okay.
That's what we're all attempting to do. I don't know which group will be which day,
but
I'm trying to get back on the schedule.
Okay, so third week.
First and third.
First and third in June, July, and August. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Anyone else?
No, no more hands up.
Thanks to all. I want to appreciate everybody's efforts tonight. It was a little bit longer of a meeting, but I think we got a lot accomplished. And I want everybody to, think about what you saw tonight. I think it's important. We have some really good options to choose from. As Kelly said, some options stand out better than others. So I think we'll be looking for public discussion and more discussion at the building committee. So can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
John, can you do a roll call, please?
Lindsay?
Yes.
Edie?
Yes.
Heidi?
Yes.
Lori?
Yes.
Tom Tracy? Tom?
Yes.
Paul, Anastasia?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Vinny?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Mark?
Yes. Thank you all. And tomorrow night, for those interested, we do have the kind of forum. You're welcome to join, but it's not an official building committee. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Night.
Right.